Hi everyone, welcome to the video on motivation for this module. In this video, I'm going to further discuss a specific theory of motivation and then add on some new theories that will help you complete the assignment for this week. So for the first theory, this one's discussed in your text, but I want to dive in a little bit deeper. This is an evolutionary theory called the drive reduction theory. This theory explains motivation, again, from an evolutionary perspective, saying that for our survival, our behavior is based on fulfilling certain needs that we have. These needs are for survival purposes, and our physiology is built in a way that when we are in need of something, when we are no longer in balance, this creates a physiological drive that kind of pushes us toward fulfilling or engaging in certain behaviors that will then feed back into this loop and satisfy those original needs. Some examples here that you see on your screen are for these primary or basic essential needs like for food or for water. Our body requires these things. So if we are deficient in food or water, it creates a hunger or a thirst drive that then motivates us to engage in certain behaviors like eating or drinking that will then satisfy that need or that deficiency in food or water. You can think about all of this is based on what we would call homeostasis or equilibrium or balance, where our body is always seeking this kinds of balance. So if we are insufficient, deficient, or in need, then we are motivated to reach that level of homeostasis again. It's like a set point. You can think about it if you have heating and air in your home or your vehicle, that you might set it at a certain point and the heating or air conditioning will turn on until it gets to that certain point and then turn off. The idea is that we would engage in certain behaviors until that need is again fulfilled and we are again at balance, but that it's constant. We are often constantly in flux. There are two types of needs that we talk about in terms of this theory. And we have primary drives. These are ones that are necessary for our biological survival. And then we have secondary drives. These are learned drives or learned things that then satisfy those primary needs or drive. So for instance, as a human species, we need some kind of money in order to usually pay for things like food or housing. We need social approval in order to, again, satisfy some of these primary drives, which I'll talk about in a moment, this kind of need that we have to belong in social settings. So one of our assignments for this week is to think about behaviors that you engage in and try and plot them in this need, drive, behavior kind of 3-box system. It does get a little bit more complex. So as you think about your own behavior and what motivates your own behavior, it might not always look this simple. And that's because if we take some very kind of basic primary drive like hunger or the need for sustenance, that behavior then of eating can be done or not done based on all different kinds of needs and drives. For instance, we know that there is a biological basis for hunger, and sometimes that's associated with a deficit of nutrition or calories, and sometimes it's not. We also know, even when you look at people, many people that have anorexia, which is an eating disorder where individuals tend to starve themselves. When they starve themselves, they get an influx of serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter that's associated with feelings of kind of more happiness. And so they don't have enough of that. And so they often feel sad or depressed or just kind of unhappy. And then when they starve themselves, they get this influx of serotonin and feel happier. So again, that's where they may have a need for sustenance, for calories, but they don't do that because there are other needs that are kind of more hierarchical or higher. We also know that we may eat even though we don't feel hunger based on external cues. So you might, if you can think of, walking past a donut shop, or is it Pringles that has the saying, you can't eat just one, right? This would be based on taste. So you eat just one, you might satisfy the calories that you need, but you might keep eating because it just tastes so delicious. We know that there are all kinds of cultural implications around eating. Eating is a culturally bound behavior, not just one that's based on the need, but people might starve themselves or overindulge based on cultural expectations or cultural norms. Emotions, we know that sometimes there might be a need for there might be an emotional need, and people engage in eating behavior to try and satisfy that emotional need. We also know that there's spirituality is kind of bound around hunger, where people might fast in order to feel closer, to be closer, or in some kind of religious practice, such as a religious type of fasting. So my purpose in showing you this complexity is that you can think about this very kind of simplistic drive reduction model in terms of motivation, and think about your own behavior and how you might be engaged in a behavior in order to satisfy a need, but you're engaging in the wrong behavior. So that behavior is never going to get you back to that need. So if we think about here, let's say there is a need for a sense of belonging, a sense of social connection. And so you go on social media and you start liking people's things because that makes you feel connected. Well, in one sense, it might make you feel connected, but on the other, it might make you feel somewhat disconnected, or start to impact your self-esteem or your self-worth and value, which then really undermines your desire to connect with others. So I encourage you, as a part of this activity, but even beyond, this theory is meant to provide some kind of explanation for all behaviors that we engage in. So really think about what you're doing on a day-to-day basis and why you're motivated to do that behavior. And is it really getting you at the end of the day at the need that you're wanting to address? I also think that drive reduction theory is a little bit simplistic and somewhat mechanical, because as Abraham Maslow suggested in the 1940s, our needs aren't necessarily all on the same level. We might have a prioritization of needs. So someone might, for instance, engage in eating behavior or the lack thereof for social approval, because that social approval is at a higher priority than the sustenance or the gaining of calories. So Maslow designed this hierarchy of needs where he said we are most motivated to start with the needs at the bottom. And then once those needs are addressed, then we can start to work our way up this hierarchy. So you can imagine, for instance, someone who might be really being encouraged by a teacher or a school counselor to do better at school, and yet they are dealing with housing or food insecurities. It might be very challenging to be motivated despite the competencies and skills and academic prowess of the student. It might be difficult to really be motivated to study for hours upon end and to get that A if they're struggling to find enough food to keep them nourished, or a safe place to reside in the evening or during the day, right? So I think this is a really helpful model, again, to apply to your own behaviors, and then think about when you're asking questions about behaviors and the people that you see around you. Why would they do what they do? Why are they motivated to engage in the behaviors that they are? And think through, where might they be? Where might you be on this hierarchy? One thing to note here is that we are all over the place on this hierarchy. It's not like we satisfy the bottom and then we continue up the pyramid and we never have to go back to the bottom. All kinds of things can cause significant fluctuations. This is not a static model. It's very fluid. Okay, moving forward. I've mentioned already kind of this need to belong, or a need for social connection. think for just a moment about some of your strongest motivations. I think a good question to get at this would be, what in your life makes it meaningful? If you were to name just a thing or two, what is it that makes your life meaningful? What's really necessary for your happiness? If you were to go to a desert island and could bring only one thing, what would you bring? Most people talk about social relationships, that if they were to go to a desert island, they would bring a friend or a loved one, right? We have a sense of togetherness, and this is what makes life very meaningful and rich. And it has been argued that this is a biological, evolutionary need. It's called the need to belong. And this deficiency in belonging will create an urge to community, an urge to connect with others in order to satisfy that need. Now, we know this for a couple of reasons. One is we know what it's like when we don't belong, when we have been shut out. We know that there are significant implications of this. For one, it's used as a form of torture because we know this, right? We know that to separate someone, to excommunicate, to banish, to put someone in solitary confinement or kind of social isolation is very, very painful, psychologically, and as I'll mention in a moment, physically painful, right? It is a form of torture. We know that we have to be connected to others to find meaning and value. As I mentioned, this is connected to real physical pain. So we think that, again, because it's just an evolutionary need, that we have kind of overlapping systems here of pain, that when you experience physical pain like a cut, when you are experiencing social withdrawal, they both overlap on these pain areas or pain receptors in the brain to cause physical pain. When you give someone who has been socially isolated something like Tylenol, they actually will report feeling better. We also know it's related to real physical experiences like feeling cold. This isn't surprising because one of the ways that we talk about being shut out or ostracized is by being iced out. People who've been socially excluded will report feeling colder. They'll report the temperature of the room is colder. They will be more inclined to drink or eat warm things. So I share this just to really demonstrate how connected the mind and the body are, that we cannot disconnect the two. Furthermore, what being shut out does is it kind of kicks off what can be this downward spiral of behaviors then that actually kind of continue the social exclusion and social withdrawal. So people who are excluded are more likely to engage in self-defeating behaviors, like being more aggressive toward others, even more irritable, more defensive. They're less likely to have empathy toward others. And by being shut out, they engage in these, which again kind of continues their being shut out, right? People don't want to be around people that are like this. And so it's just a negative downward spiral. It doesn't have to be that way, but I just think this is important to consider the real serious implications of being socially excluded. So on the other hand, why is belonging so important? What kind of benefits are there to belonging? Well, we know first and foremost that we are social creatures, and part of why we are is because cooperation leads to better chances of survival. The more we can connect with others in small groups, the more likely we are to be able to protect one another and to survive. This also has a psychological benefit where being together, being socially connected enhances self-esteem. It enhances our sense of independence as we are able to kind of see how we compare to others, see how we are needed, what kind of new things we bring or offer to the table and to the group. So it gives us a sense of competence. There are brain regions that are activated when you show people things that are related to kind of physical safety and show them things like loved ones. These reward centers and those around feelings of safety are activated, right? So we literally and psychologically can be safer connected to small groups. And because of all of this, there is a strong correlation between social connectedness and affiliation and the increased health, longevity of life, and a reduction of mental illness. When you look around the world to the people that live the longest, you look at their diet, all kinds of things, and what tends to be true in all of these cultures where people live very long is that they are well connected socially throughout the lifespan. Think about Western European industrialized culture and what's happening to the elderly. Many times they are put in homes, they can be socially isolated, excluded. Now during the pandemic, more than ever, we see social exclusion, and this is having real physical and psychological consequences in terms of physical health as well as mental health. So we see more incidences of depression and suicide and other aspects of mental health. So hopefully that's given you a little bit to jump off from as you dive deeper within the reading on the theories of motivation with drives and states, and then think through also how and why we might have a motivation to connect with others. This video will also hopefully give you some information for the assignment this week, which will allow you to apply some of this to your own life. So thanks everybody. Enjoy this week's module reading and assignments. Take care. Happy learning.